Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we are headed back underwater to learn about bass behavior. Come along. Here we are, middle of February. It is freezing cold today. This time of year, the temperatures go up and then they crash back down. They go up, they crash back down. So I was sitting in front of the computer going through some footage and I got on this topwater tangent. Why? Because when it's freezing cold and you don't want to be outside, you start dreaming about topwater. At least I do. So today what I wanted to do is take you guys underwater and watch some bass behavior and how they interact with topwater. Now, northern guys, this one is actually for you. I know that a lot of you are trapped inside, a lot of you are dealing with ice. So for you, let's just forget about all that for a little bit. Don't worry, this is not fresh footage I shot this week. I'm not out catching giant topwater fish this week and rubbing it in. This is footage that we've shot in the past, but I want to analyze it with you today so that the second you can get out there, I can show you some super early season topwater tricks. Now for guys in the South, this is actually timely. Florida guys, Alabama, Southern Georgia, Louisiana, Texas guys, some of you can apply this right now, which is awesome. So with that, let's get subsurface. What I want to talk to you guys about today is that when you are throwing a topwater early season, much earlier than most people realize you even can throw a topwater, there's a method to the madness. So when other people are throwing a lipless, a chatterbait, a spinnerbait, a glide bait, you can actually fudge a topwater into that mix if you know what you're doing. See, the value of a topwater in the early season is that bass probably haven't seen them since, depending on where you are in the country, somewhere between September and November, which means they're incredibly vulnerable to a topwater. Pre-spawn bass move ultra shallow on those warm days. They'll get up in a foot of water. So what makes you think that a topwater 8 inches over their head when a big bass is sitting in a foot of water, that's not very far away. It's not crazy to think that she would go that far to eat the right meal. It's all about the right meal. So, super early season, the vast majority of what we do, now there are some exceptions and we're gonna talk about that, but the vast majority of what we do is walking baits. Specifically baits that don't have a super wide glide, something with a little bit of a cup to the face or a popper style bait. But sometimes we're popping them and letting them sit, but more often than not, we're walking our poppers because they move super slow in place and it's easy for those fish to catch them. See, the difference between a walking bait and some of your other options is that a walking bait, we're talking about distance traveled forward, okay? If I'm winding a buzz bait as an example, and again, there are exceptions and I'll get to that, but as an example, if I'm burning a buzz bait, it takes a set amount of speed to cross, whereas a walking bait takes much longer to move towards the boat or towards you on the shore. It spends much more time over the head of the bass, which gives the bass an opportunity to take the time to study the bait, to look up at it and to study it and decide if that's something they want to do. When it just cruises by going too fast, or if you're fast walking a topwater, they're not going to hit that in cold water. And I am talking cold water. I'm telling you, you can catch a topwater fish in 50-degree water, 55-degree water, 60-degree water. Now, you will not catch very many. I'm not telling you that this should be your favorite technique in the early season. But what I'm saying is if you've had a good day and it's warm and you've caught some fish, give this a try because when it does work, it tends to be the giants. And again, for northern guys, right now we're just dreaming. We're forgetting about outside. We're taking our mind somewhere else and we're just having a good time watching fish blow up on topwater. So that walking bait, again, is all about staying in place and giving those fish the time needed to decide that that's something they want to do without having to go crazy for it. Poppers, even more so, something with a cupped face. Pop Max, something similar. In the video description, I will link you my favorite walking baits, my favorite popping baits, my favorite faster baits for this early season topwater thing. And again, it's just something that you can mix into your arsenal and try, and somebody will come back and say that they caught a giant. Now, it's not going to be everybody. You might be the guy who tries it, doesn't happen, goes back to what you were doing. But your buddy might be the guy who tries it, catches some small fish doing other things, picks it up, and sticks a 12-pounder. Right? This is something that catches giants. They're very vulnerable to it because they haven't seen it for so long. So back to that popper, that cupped mouth, when this bait walks, the action is so tight that it's really not going anywhere over the top of those fish. Now, of course, you can pop it and then it's covering more water. But if you really slow it down and slow walk it, it's a very slow, very methodical look. And those fish have time to just look up and slurp it. They won't even break the surface most of the time when they're doing this. They'll just vacuum it down. Now, there is a rare exception. The buzzbait was something that we have done for a long time, and the whopper plopper, when it became popular, really exploited that same thing. Now notice these are both black. With my faster moving baits, really early season like this, February, March, the fast baits, for me, it has always been about black. I'm not sure I can even tell you why that is. I just know that when I've caught really big ones way too early in the year, it's always been on those black baits. So the buzz bait, we're doing a half at the most. 3/8 is even better, and you're just slow rolling that bait. So a buzz bait is a straight retrieved bait. And if I threw a half or a 3/4 and I'm just winding that thing, you know, buzzbait's throwing a bunch of water, making a bunch of racket. I prefer a more subtle bait. So no clacker, very subtle, and as slow as I can wind it. So I'm gonna hold my rod tip up high and I'm just gonna slow wind it, just barely keep it on the surface. This is a great option. Again, I'm gonna link you a couple of my favorite options. I also really like a quad, the plastic quad blade. It goes even slower. So a black buzzbait run right on cover. Where this has really shined for me is in shallower bodies of water, where the fish will push back into a pocket and maybe that whole pocket is less than 4 or 5 feet deep. And I can get right up against the bank, right up against the cover, slow roll that thing, and those fish that are sitting right on the bank hunting, when that comes by, it's so close to them that they lash out. Now again, this whole time I'm talking about slower moving. Walking baits are the key, but there's something about a black buzzbait that also gets it done. It just has worked for a very long time for me. And then the other bait that exploits that is the whopper plopper. And again, earlier in the season, I go black. Later, I'll throw other colors. But that whopper plopper, specifically the 130 size, there's something about it being a large, obnoxious meal. The whopper plopper just breaks all the rules. I will never understand why fish just completely lose their minds over a whopper plopper, but they do. We've seen it over and over again where a fish is doing their own thing and that whopper plopper's running and you just see that fish turn, start tracking, go full throttle and blast that thing. And they'll do it in cold water. It's one of those baits, like when we talk about speed cranking, our tactical crank, triggering a core response, snapping an A-rig, a jerk bait, things that trigger a core response in a bass. When they get super shallow, even in the cold, the sound, the speed, the size of a 130 whopper plopper just seems to pull a similar core response out of those fish. And I think that's really interesting and something that is worth at least tying on and occasionally having in your arsenal, because when that bite comes, that will be a bite that you do not forget. Now again, this is by far the earliest we've ever talked about topwater, but I wanted to do some daydreaming, and then I got to thinking about the actual early season applications and the number of fish I've caught in late February, early March. And in my mind, see, when we were in the West, this was a Delta and Clear Lake thing. I mean, I could go out early March. Other guys are still throwing a jig in 25 foot of water. I could catch them on a black buzzbait in 18 inches of water. In the South, this is, if it's speaking to you, you already know it, right? You're thinking, I've got those conditions. I've got fish around really shallow cover on a warm afternoon. It's worth a try. I had a client years ago fishing a Highland reservoir. He was not with me, he was on his own, but he was one of my clients. And his wife caught a 13 pounder on a popper in January. Think about that. But that's a fish that has moved up to sun to get warm in shallow water. Popper lands right on top of her head. That fish hasn't seen one of those in 5 months. Gone. You're talking about a teener on a popper. It's crazy. So don't rule that out of your arsenal this spring. Hopefully you guys, some of you just plain enjoyed the footage. I just think it's awesome to watch how these fish really will, on a fast moving bait, they'll just come in, track that thing and just mow it down without hesitation. And then those slow moving baits, totally different. They turn and they look at them and then pow, they smoke those things. It's awesome. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.